So huge numbers of coal plants are retiring. This is not even policy. This is the market. Right? And how did it happen? Unfortunately, this green line is natural gas growth. So natural gas, when you look at the carbon content and the efficiency of its use, only puts out about half the carbon that coal does. So you replace a lot of coal with a lot of natural gas, we're doing better, right? On the other hand, we have this natural gas chugging off. That's most of it. Renewables is some of it. Here's renewables in purple. Okay. Renewables are now providing about 10% of U.S. Power sector energy. Questions about it?
Does that include in any way methane leakage from the extraction?
No.
And if it did, do we have any idea what additional emissions?
Yeah, all those numbers are quantified. I don't have them here today, but we can talk about it. Yeah, methane emissions from fossil fuel operations, there's a recent paper just out a week or two ago, substantially higher than we thought. And there's been some data in the past year or two that could have been hinting at that already. So EPA estimates for methane leakage, if anyone's looking, they're way underestimated, like on the order of 50% from the fossil fuel sector specifically. Right, so a lot of methane also comes from elsewhere, right, from marshes, from landfills, right? But we're talking about fossil fuel operations. Okay, electric power sector, nuclear stays about constant, about 20% of the energy. Oil, almost zero. Remember, this is electric power. We do not use oil to generate electricity. We use coal, gas, and now renewables and nuclear. Not oil. Like oil is like 1%. Okay, so that accounts for this 10% power sector drop. There was a very small drop in the transportation sector. This is actually pretty good news, considering that the transportation sector is now the single largest sector source of emissions. You can see here, net emissions. Transportation is now on top of power. Right. But these other areas, other includes things like agriculture, definitely increasing in all of these areas. So there's a lot of work to do, and one of the messages I think that's important for today is going to be how broad the efforts really need to be. I'm pretty confident we're in the right place with advocating for an aggressive carbon tax as the foothold, as the context. But we get this bill passed, there's going to be an unbelievable amount of other work to do in all these other sectors, and we will see that in the simulation. Yeah?
I feel like other estimates put agriculture higher.
Okay. You mean more than a 4% increase
Yeah.
from 2018 to 2019?
No, not increase. I mean as a percentage of the
Okay.
total emissions. So, do you see the same conflict, or like I don't know?
No, I don't know. I mean, there's different how the numbers are
I see.
reported and massaged is
So
different.
the energy might be in the ag, or the transportation might be like.
Yeah, I mean, it's how they partition things. Different groups do it differently. So you really need to look into the details before you worry about, oh my God, there's a discrepancy with something else I saw.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever factored in war as one of the huge users of, or producers of carbon?
This doesn't factor in war, but the newest IPCC modeling framework, which is going to be coming out this year, includes what are called shared socioeconomic pathways, which basically embodies the whole human world together with the climate system. And it projects 5 different futures, one of which is a lot of conflict between nations. And what are the consequences for that? So that is actually an important thing to think about. We can't get to it today, but it's going to...
I just was thinking about that in terms of your categories.
Yeah, well, it's not encompassed here, sure.
What was the reference to the report? What report is that?
The IPCC, the 6th assessment report is coming out, at least the physical science part of it is coming out next year. Okay. So, let's just look at where we are and what we need to do. this is temperature now versus year. 2020, we're a little over 1 degree centigrade now. We might say 1.1. I've been saying 1.0, but I need to start saying 1.1. And if we keep going the way we're going, this is probably a very optimistic estimate, actually. 1.5 degree warming in about 20 years. Okay, that does not include things like the inertia of this climate system, which would make it more. Okay, so that's where we are, and if we had no climate policies at all, we'd be in this area. Our current policies will probably leave us around 3.5 degrees C if we continue them. You'll see in the simulation that the number for business as usual continuation is a little bit higher than that. It's 4.1. That discrepancy doesn't really make a difference for the way we want to use things today. Yeah?
Is the 4.5C based on RCP 8.5?
I don't remember specifically. RCP 8.5 is usually associated with 5 degrees or so. But so if it's not that, it's close. Yeah. Right, so Paris Agreement, if we keep the pledges, very much in doubt, but if we did, we'd get a 3 degree world. Of course, we need to be down here, optimally 1.5. So what do we need to do? IPCC 1.5 degree report in 2018. We want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees with no or limited overshoot. We could also do it with high overshoot. I'll show you on the next slide what that would mean. But we basically need to decrease emissions. We're up around 40 to 20 to 25 gigatons per year by 2030. The typical number is we need to decrease 40–45%. When this came out, it was 12 years. Everybody panicked. Oh my God, we have 12 years to stop climate change. We don't have 12 years to stop climate change. If we want a 1.5 degree world to be consistent with that, we must decrease 45% in 12 years. Right? That's what the 12 years means. Okay. This is associated with a carbon budget, right? So it's pretty broad estimate. It reflects the limit of our knowledge, how many gigatons of carbon can go up. You see if it's 40 per year, there's not that many years that it goes down, you have a little bit more time because you increment each year is less. Right? So that's what we need to do. Yeah?
Sean, I'm confused about how this relates to when we put it in the atmosphere, it takes time for it to come back out.
Yes.
So this is the scale of just what we are emitting. It doesn't take into consideration the degrees. Does it take into
Yeah,
consideration?
but this budget accounts includes the idea that a lot of it sticks around.
Got it.
Right, so we need to get down to zero. Right, so sometimes there's a misconception out there, some folks who may talk about, oh, as long as we flatten out our emissions, we're good. No, right, we need to get to zero emissions, right, by 2050. Right, and we need to do a lot of that fast, right, and the reason we need to do more fast is because whatever goes out there sticks around. So you start to not work, you start to not reduce emissions next year, the year after. The burden in future years gets substantially greater. Yeah.
The range on the total carbon budget, is the uncertainty there due to not knowing like what each sink is doing, how much is the ocean taking, what are they, how much is?
Yeah, I mean, that's all going on. I mean, it's not included in it, but I mean, that's underneath the estimates of the budget. The budget is arrived at by sophisticated climate modeling using programs that are not that different from what we're about to do.
What do you mean by zero?
Zero. Where do you see zero?
Decrease CO2 emissions to zero by 2050.
Well, you know, about zero. I mean, zero would be, you know, okay.
If I light a fire, it's carbon.
I get it, but I mean, new fossil emissions, right? The fire you light goes into the carbon cycle and comes back out when plants photosynthesize.
You mean net zero?
Net zero,
No,
yes, yes, net zero.
Zero.
In fact, you can still burn some natural gas and not trap the carbon in the exhaust, right? And if you are doing carbon negative elsewhere, you can still get to net zero, right? All right. So, 4 pathways to a 1.5 degree world, right? We get our act together very fast. P1 and P2. We don't overshoot. That's what this orange and yellow means. Agriculture, forestry, and other land use. Bioenergy with carbon capture and storage is one of the main technological methods for actively removing carbon from the atmosphere. Agriculture, land use, that means planting trees. At least the president wants to plant 1 trillion trees. He doesn't want to do anything else. 1 trillion trees is good. Right? So sharp decreases mean you don't need very much of this technology. Of course, if you take longer, look how big this is getting, and in the end, the technological, at least according to these models, technological takes up more of the slack than the natural. Although the program we'll look at doesn't really reproduce that. Yeah.
So it's a simplistic way of looking at what the president is talking about with trees in the orange and yellow.
Yeah.
That's what he wants to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the problem
And
is
we're
he also-
talking about the gray. Is that a simplistic way?
Well, he wants to increase the gray while he does a little bit of the orange and yellow. So that in
And he
the
wanted
end,
to-
it ends up like this. And it's you can increase orange and yellow, but if gray goes up, you're going to end up flat.
Right, and we want to, and we're focused on decreasing the gray, and that's kind of
The carbon tax is most certainly focused on decreasing the gray. Absolutely. Yeah. Other policies that we'll talk about a lot, other policies like planting trees are what you get for going carbon negative. The exception to that is that we have a CCS credit in the EICDA. Right? And that's a very important question.
So what is the bioenergy carbon capture? What is that?
That is a method by which you harvest surface biomass in a sustainable way, burn it in an electricity power plant, create electricity, capture the carbon as it goes out of the stack, and bury it. So since the carbon you took to burn was on the surface to begin with, and you buried it, you've taken it out of the surface cycle and put it in a geologically inaccessible place. So you basically reversed fossil fuel drilling.
Is that technologically feasible? Is that like R&D that's yet to be done?
It's not feasible at scale. In principle, it's feasible. The elementary steps are known and doable.
Can you expand on the CCS tax credit? What is the modification?
We give a credit for companies that they pay a tax, but then they burn the natural gas after they pay the tax and they capture it. The extent that they capture it, they get a rebate back. Yeah. Yeah.
What is the time lag between planting a tree and actually having it grow to the extent that?
Long. Yeah, that's actually something you can model in the program, but yeah, decades. So the time lags is a big deal here. Yeah.
Well, so I had a question about like the carbon capture. So you bury it in the ground, so what are like the environmental impacts of burying it in the ground?
Well, there's a lot of research on that. It does, and one of the places you can put it is old fossil fuel reservoirs, right? And there are lots of not sure if the right technical word is salt caverns. Anyway, there's a lot of places to put it, and the research so far suggests that it can be buried safely. Yeah. That doesn't mean that that's perfect, right? I mean, obviously, if you start to do it at scale, and it's something else. Yeah.
Does the carbon tax affect fracking or just people who buy gasoline or oil?
It's imposed upstream at the wellhead, or the refinery, and so it's paid basically by fossil fuel companies. And then they pass on the price, and then you pay more for gas.
So it does affect fracking?
Of course, absolutely. Yes?
In terms of sequestration, there's a cost, an energy cost it takes to actually do that.
It does, you're right,
So that-
absolutely.
Figured into.
If you burn fossil fuels to sequester fossil fuels, you're not getting very far.
Right.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to move on. Let's look at this program. Okay. Let's see what Climate Interactive has done and what we might be able to learn from it. Okay. So I'm going to start with carbon pricing. So just to tell you what the features of this program, it's built on decades of very rigorous climate data. Right? So when we run this program, we are simultaneously, and we're doing it right now, simultaneously solving tens of thousands of equations that are in the model of the system. Right? This model is more simplified, obviously, than some of the most sophisticated ones that are run by the contributors to the IPCC reports, for example. But it is what's called an integrated assessment model, or IAM. It's related to an IAM. It's more simplified. It's what's called more aggregated. Can't deal with all the detailed parts. But basically, an IAM means that it's got the global economy in it. The simplest kind of IAM would calculate the social cost of carbon, if you guys have heard of that as a term. But this program also has, besides the economy, it has modules for energy systems, and then it also has a representation of the Earth's climate system in it. So it's got everything in it, right? And it's simplified. Is the model true? The model is not true, right? The model is an approximation. The real world is presumably true. Let's agree. There are certain sets of facts that are not a question. But the model, of course, any model is an approximation of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to appreciate that, and we're going to use it for what we can, right, by recognizing that there's got that limitation. That doesn't mean we can't learn a lot from it. It's well calibrated against other models that are out there. I can show you stuff on that if you're interested later. It's very transparent, so there's a, 500-page technical manual. It's available online. I haven't gotten through it, but it's there. It's got a lot of built-in assumptions. I'm going to show you at least one of them. If you don't like their assumptions, you can change a lot of them. You can go into the program, change the assumption. Okay? And it's a global model. So this is important. So this has kind of screwed me up in trying to learn enough about it to stand up here. Because I think about the US system. And the world is a bigger place than the US. Right? So what we're going to, if we try to model our carbon pricing policy, that's really, US emissions going down 90% relative to 2016 and the year 2050 or whatever it is. Right? It's not the whole world, right? So we can program it in there, but we're going to have to recognize that the results are reflecting a global simulation. Okay? Nonetheless, the dynamics, the system dynamics that happen in the interaction between the economy, the energy sector, the actual Earth's physical climate system are well represented in here. Right? And so that the kinds of things that you have to think through when you want to design a policy plan, or more accurately, when you want to convince a local person about a policy plan. I imagine, right, I was in a lobby meeting with a Republican congressperson recently, and that office is really big on forestry. Eric will know which office this is. Really big on that kind of stuff. So you can, if they're open to it, show them what you can get out of forestry in this model. You can get something out of it, absolutely. Can you get to a 1.5 degree world, a 2 degree world, or a 3 degree world even? No, you cannot. Right? So maybe the fact that they can see it here, and they're running the simulation themselves on a laptop, will that make a difference in advocacy? Maybe it will. Yeah.
So to what degree can we translate these relationships that you're going to find in the model from global impacts to U.S. policy?
Yeah, well, that's the challenge, right? I mean, I think what we can, as long as we are willing to stay reasonably general with respect to, what can a carbon tax do? What can it not do? What works synergistically with it? What is redundant with it? Those kinds of insights are available.
It sounds like a word of caution there, though.
There is definitely a word of caution there. Yeah, you can't really take this and say, okay, I've got the answer now. Right? Not least because it's running in, a second on my laptop. Right? It's not a supercomputer I have here.
I've spent a lot of time in Salem, and we've been in Republican senators' offices. One House person in particular, Brock Smith, one of the main things that he's been saying is that, it doesn't matter what Oregon does, because we're only this tiny little piece.
Okay.
This would not be the thing I want to bring into his office, because it would validate that, correct?
Well, his comment is inconsistent with just a very fundamental science, which is that this is an incremental problem, right? And it's a problem of the stock in the atmosphere more than the flow through, because it sticks around for so long, right? So anything we do, right? Not to mention, if we're going to talk the talk, we better walk the walk in our own lives. But you put a solar panel in your house, you buy an EV, right? There's stuff out there that lets you calculate your savings. You may not think it's much, but it's incrementally in the right direction. And that's what they need, that's what these guys need to understand, right? Is that, yes, you're not a US senator, you are an Oregon representative. Will you please do what you can do in your present position, right? That's what I would say, yeah.
So is, the way to think of this is an opportunity to show people, if we do this, things move in this direction.
Yes,
So, rather than giving you absolute answers.
correct. Yeah, absolutely, yes.
But they go in the right certain direction, but also isn't there a relative question that can be answered here between types of action?
So much.
Like trees versus carbon tax?
Oh, absolutely. You can look at relative magnitudes. Yeah, I mean, it's not just directions, it's also, this had a big effect, that didn't do squat, why not? And then trying to think about why. That's also available within the context. So yeah, you can do some of that. You just can't, present it like, if you plant 1 trillion trees, you will decrease global warming by 0.387 degrees. Because it's beyond the ability of the models, any models, right? Because they're approximations, it's in your computer, right? Trees are in the computer, right? I mean, you go to the store and you go to buy gas, it's in the computer, right? Yeah, very.
The probability of hitting these marks, if that built in, what is it? Is it more likely than unlikely in order to make it show a downward trend?
No, I mean, there's an approximation on every calculation. But
So my argument is that going to a senator, going to a congressperson, a state would be, we are notorious in terms of misjudging where we're aiming.
yeah,
So to increase the probability of getting the 1.5 climate, we should probably aim for 1.
absolutely. I'm all for aiming for 1. All right. Here. And let me get into here. And here's our program. Okay. So this would be a good time to look at your handout, the complicated one, not the one right later today. We'll go over complicated stuff on there. So what you will see is that you've got 18 areas of potential manipulative control, right? So that's what you get to play with, right? There's 8, 6, 4, 18. And they're all in the middle of your sheet. And around the decorating the outside of your sheet is just a little brief explanation of what those 18 things are. Pretty self-explanatory, really. You're not gonna earn an advanced degree in climate with those explanations, but at least it's something. And then what we have up here that's new, of course, is these 2 graphs. So you can display lots of different things on these graphs. So on the left, there's global sources of primary energy. And what we see here is coal and ground, oil, gas, renewables, bioenergy, nuclear, and if you want to impose a new technology, you can do that. This is totally freely available on the internet. You go in there, you click Inroad Simulation, and this screen pops up on your computer. That's one readout, so it's good to have an energy readout, especially if we're going to start by talking about energy. I think it's probably because that's where the carbon pricing most easily interacts with. And then over here, there's some readout, right? There's some temperature change in this case, but you could read out other things. Right? So one thing I'd like to read out is greenhouse gas emissions by gas area. So you see all these possible readouts you could show, right? So, this is the one we were originally showing just temperature, which is impacts temperature. Okay. Well, what if we want to show, and this is a business as usual scenario, which I'll talk about in a second. Right. But if you want to change this, right, we want to show a different impact. For example, sea level rise, there's your sea level rise if we don't do anything, right? But this is also subject to an assumption in the program that you could change. This doesn't actually look too bad, right? This is like 4 or 5 feet of sea level rise in 2100. That's bad, but it's not the worst case scenario by any means because the assumption is sort of midline. Okay, yeah.
how long, the timeline, how long it takes for temperature to kick in after a given percent of emission? 10
Yeah,
years
I
or
mean,
40
that's,
years or?
there's no one answer to that because it's embodied in the climate response, right? In the way in which, the carbon cycle, a certain amount builds up, a certain amount of heat is trapped, the reflectivity of the earth is changing. Lots of things are going into how much the temperature goes up.
When someone asks you, what's the timeline, for emissions emitted in 2010, when do we feel it?
Well, we feel it right away. We feel it right away, and then we continue to feel it.
So these more like 10 years?
Oh, we feel it right away. It's up there right away when we emit. The atmosphere is well mixed. You emit in China, it's well mixed a couple of weeks going around the equator, a couple of months going up and down.
Does it get absorbed by the ocean first?
No, it eventually gets absorbed by the ocean. That's a longer time frame. That's more like decades. The yearly time frame is the photosynthesis cycle. So about 40–50% comes out in a year, and then some more comes out in a decade, and some more comes out. Is that what you wanted to hear?
No, but I don't want to distract.
All right, I'm talking about it. So that's sea level rise. So here's the one I'd like to show. Greenhouse gas emissions by gas area. Notice we still read out the temperature. So business as usual, don't do anything else. 4-degree temperature rise, 4.1 in the year 2100. That's what this is saying, right? When we make a change in here, as we're about to do, right, that means that those tens of thousands of calculations are happening in the background, and we get new readouts. We get as many new readouts as we care to click on, because we will have to run the simulation. Then we can look at whatever readouts we want.
Just one quick one. So the slide you're showing, the little black dots, is that where the percentages are now, and you can fill with it, of course?
Yeah, this is where you go in and click to make changes.
So the slide that you see now is where we are, how much coal, how much.
Correct. When you open the program, it's where we are.
Okay.
It's the projection of what will happen if we continue business as usual.
And you can mess with that with just moving those little black things.
Yeah, you can input policy, which is what we're about to do. Absolutely. Right. So you might notice here, so for example, this readout is pretty sophisticated. So you see the number there. In the year 2046, there were 61.3 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year emitted from, and that's the black stuff, energy CO2. So notice here on the right, that's the reason I like this graph. Land use carbon dioxide, energy carbon dioxide, fluorinated gases in yellow, methane in blue. Look how big the methane is. Right? And then nitrous oxide in purple. And as most of you, I'm sure, know, nitrous oxide and methane are the big agricultural emissions. Yeah. Well, you're speaking to, you're bringing up a number of, so it's a question of skepticism, basically. Why should we believe any of this, right? So, one way to answer that could be that the models are calibrated with hindsight. In other words, we'll start to have a lot of data, say, for the year 1980. We also have a lot of data for the year 2010, right? So we'll run the model from 1980 to 2010, and we'll see, did we predict accurately what happened in 2010, right? And so that is a way to go back and say, well, we did it okay, right? We were able to predict it. We didn't bias anything in that calculation. So doesn't that mean you should at least consider the possibility that we might be right for what happens in 2030? That's one answer. So, yeah. Correct. So there's a huge amounts of coal in the ground. So reserve to production ratios for thermal coal are very high, seems like you know. And so if we don't do anything to, for example, price carbon, the coal use is projected to simply continue in this energy economy model for the whole world.
This is the whole world piece.
Sorry?
This is the whole world.
This is the whole world. Everything is the whole world in this. Every single thing you're going to see is the whole world, right? Yeah.
I wish they had a scale for political denial and resistance.
It would be off the scale.
John, Megan, thank you. The renewables, I assume, lumps the hydroelectric also.
Correct.
And I'm concerned that people might have the conception they can just scale that. Obviously, we can't scale it for dams.
Correct.
Could
Yes.
you just comment on that and why you decided not to split that?
Why they decided not to split it out?
Yeah.
There are areas in the program where it does get split out. Is that right, Richard? Have you seen that? Solar and wind and hydro actually split out somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
there's places in here to do that. It's just that in this particular screen, you know, first pass is this.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
The sliders are all change-causing scenarios.
Correct.
Are they also interactive in terms of showing up or being influenced by other changes?
Yes.
Yeah, so the stuff is going to be cumulative. We'll see what it is. So one more question, and I'll move on. Yeah.
So you mentioned the methane in the right graph is primarily from agriculture, so it's not methane from energy, because the methane from energy is in the brown.
No, that just includes all the methane.
The blue?
Well, these are the emissions, these are the sources of energy.
So the methane blue includes natural gas.
Yeah, blue is natural gas.
Okay.
So this is
On the
what
right
we
side.
use. This is what we use and this is what we emit, and what we emit includes ag as well as leaks from fossil fuel, right? We burn methane, you get CO2, you don't get more methane, but we leak a lot of methane.
So you've got about 15 minutes, so maybe.
Okay, thank you. Take a look here. Notice that oil starts going down. Who knows why?
Supply.
Run out.
Oh, wow. I just had 20 answers. One answer.
Supply.
Replaced by natural gas.
Replaced by natural gas. Incorrect.
Supply.
Supply. Incorrect. So reserve production ratio for oil is 50. It's been 50 for the last 40 years. Every time we use some, we find more. Right? Yeah, Eric.
Battery replacement car.
Yes. So if we go here,
Yes.
if we look at what?
Yeah, what did he say?
Battery electrification, transport, I'm going here, look at where the arrow is. Transport electrification, I'm going to increase it by just on the slider. Boom, okay? So let's just watch that happen. Right, isn't that cool? Tens of thousands of calculations as we speak, right? Right, but we only got a lousy 0.1 degree out of it.
Cold goes up when the red goes down.
Cold goes up when the red goes down. Right? You just plug your electric car into a coal-fired power plant, Eric. It's so much fun to pick on Eric. Right? So that's an illustration that you have to do things in the right order. Right? We're not ready for EVs in West Virginia. We're just not. Right? It's 80–90% coal in the electricity sector there. It would be worse if we plugged in EVs in West Virginia. Right? So we need to do something else first. Right?
But the numbers went down when electrification went up.
Which numbers went down?
The overall numbers.
Yeah, it went down a lot because oil went down.
Right.
So we got something, and not we got nothing. But we didn't get a lot, right? You might have hoped to have gotten a lot more. Okay. So let's look at these assumptions.
Plant a trillion trees for us, John.
Sorry, what?
Plant a trillion trees for us.
I will after I do this. How about that? You see in here simulation assumptions. I just want to show you something about the program. So assumptions, all of these things can have different variables associated with them. So let's look at climate system sensitivity. And notice here it says 3 degrees. All right? So what that means, this is very kludgy here, but right? So in the year 1880, we had 280 ppm CO2. And in the year 2020, we have 415. Right? And some year in the future, we're going to hopefully not get there. Right? We don't want to get there. But if we were to get there, this would be doubling, right? So climate sensitivity, this is like the single most crucial parameter to know about in these models, and it's not very well determined. It's 3 degrees is the average, and from a lot of different labs works, right? But delta T 2x, that's what this means, right? Maybe it's 3 degrees C, and that's what En-ROADS is telling us, that that's what it shows. But maybe we don't like 3 degrees C, right? 3 degrees C gets us 4.1 degrees, business as usual. What if the climate sensitivity is, what if the climate is more sensitive? What if the same amount of emissions gives you more temperature rise? Because it might, right? We don't know. So we go up here and we increase this, and now we're up to 5.7 if the climate sensitivity is 5 degrees. Most climate scientists don't think it's anywhere near that high. Right? That's probably even a ruled out number. But 4 degrees is still within the bounds of possibility for sure. Could be that we get 5 degrees C, not 4.1. On the other hand, if we go below, right, now we're only 3.1. Right? What is Earth's climate sensitivity? A very fundamental physical parameter about Earth that we do not know very well. Right? So, important to keep this in mind, right? So let's go back to 3.0. We'll get rid of the assumptions, and now we're back to where we started from. So, Eric, you wanted me to do something, so I'm going to throw away what I was planning and do what you want.
Plant a trillion trees.
All right, let's plant some trees and see what happens. We plant a whole bunch of trees, and we didn't get very much. Why? Because all the rest of the energy emissions kept going up. I mean, that's certainly one answer.
They take a long time to
You do the
grow.
simulations, you have to go back and forth like we did before.
Sure. Did that not work?
Yeah. It worked.
It's just that you don't see anything.
So the slide you're
So little happened. Yeah, Katie.
When you say climate sensitivity, are you kind of talking like the Earth's immune system to this pollution we're putting out?
Yeah, you could look at it like that. Like how resistant is the Earth to our insults of burning fossil fuel?
Can you go to the forestation bar and find out what actually the details were?
Sure. But let me ask first, do you guys want to see the carbon pricing simulation?
Yes!
Now?
That's supposed to be the finale, right?
Reset. So let's go to carbon price. Okay? So one thing we could do is, so what's going to happen when I hit carbon price and I give it a nice high price? We're going to set our actual policy in here. Okay? Did somebody spin this for me?
Isn't it great being part of CCL?
Right? So what's going to happen? Who wants to tell me what's going to happen? First hand belongs to, yes.
What's going to happen when you plug in our carbon price?
Or when you just set a high price?
Yeah, it's going to go to 2.8.
2.8.
Yes.
Okay, any other predictions?
3.5.
What?
3.5.
3.5, okay.
3.
3. All right, so Danellis, you close to 3.1.
$1, Bob.
That's the answer, actually. We'll see
You
how
said it was going to be more than 3 at the beginning, I remember.
That's cheating. All right, so this is a nice high price, 3.2. Okay, so we can look at that. And you know, what is happening here? So coal is going way down, right? And renewables are going way up, right? What's happening to gas? It's going down a little, right? But not a whole lot. The blue line.
And coal goes back up.
Yeah, and then coal goes back up over time. Anybody want to guess what's going on with that?
I'm guessing they assume CCS comes into play.
Yes, that's exactly right. On the world scale, and this is one of the things that messed me up. I actually wrote emails in and I was like, you guys are wrong about this. And they're like, John, it's a global model. It's not the United States anymore, right? Because there's all these coal-fired power plants that are kind of built in Asia, right? So we want them retired, but if we can't get them retired, then we want to equip them with CCS at least, right? So,
What is that? I'm not
so CCS is carbon capture and storage. Okay, so what we can do is we can, let's reset this simulations. Reset. Let's program our bill. How about that? Okay, so carbon price starts at 15. There's a little bit of a kludge in the way I have to do this, right? It's going to start to phase in this year, let's say. But we're going to do the initial target in 1 year. The final target on the screen is 315 And yes, I'm ignoring inflation adjustment, which is in the bill. Yes, I'm ignoring that means 15 per year if we don't meet the targets. Year to start achieving, 2021. Years to achieve, let's say we want to get to 2050, 29, boom. And there's our policy, right? Everybody see that? 0 to 315 in the year 2050. Right? What do we get? We get 3.1. Right? Here's coal. Now, what do we believe about coal based on actually simulations we already, on modeling we already have, for example, from Noah Kaufman's work at Columbia SEPA, right, the think tank in Columbia that's actually modeled our bill, right? Coal is basically wiped out, right, like basically completely. So why don't we say, okay, maybe we could just wipe coal out. So we leave the carbon price as it is, and then we go to coal, and we say, you know what? I think that we are never going to build another coal-fired power plant, which is, I believe, true for the United States. There's not one single coal-fired power plant on the drawing board in the United States today, not even one. Right? There was one in Kansas, and it's gone. Right? They just blew up our money. Now there's none. Right? That's not true global, but let's be optimistic and say that in 2025 the world stops building coal infrastructure. Now the coal drops. Why does it take so long to drop? The lifetime of the facilities, right? So things take a long time because of the lifetime of the facilities. Okay.
What's the assumed capacity factor of those coal plants?
I'm sorry?
What's the assumed capacity factor of those
Oh
coal
my
plants?
God, I have no idea what the assumed capacity factor. We could look it up, I suppose. Yes.
Quick question, so this MIT model has a particular sensitivity to the carbon price, brings it down to 3.1 in yours. The IPCC has looked at a number of good peer-reviewed models and answered this same question. What global carbon price would be required to come down to 2C?
Yeah.
Where does MIT's sensitivity lie within that range of models? Is this typical? Is it an outlier? Do you have-
I think it's typical. But it depends on, let me take that back. It depends on what assumptions you make about what will propagate from the tax. And this is not making very many assumptions about what will propagate from the tax. It's inputting the energy economics on other, that's why renewables has gotten boosted up, right? But it's not looking at, 2.1 million jobs, and it's not looking at, right? It doesn't embody that kind of thing in this model, at least not yet. So we need to go and say, okay, what do we think we can do, right, now that we've got, right, so I'm going to get out of here.
Yeah.
What can you do to get down to 2?
Yeah, what do we need to do to get down to 2? What we need to do is deal with methane. That's what we need to do to get, down to 2. Sorry, how do I get to that? Because this is the results of modeling of our bill, okay? So the drop by 2030, 37%, not enough for 1.5 degree world, but definitely enough for 2 degree world. So our bill is in between, okay? 84% CO2 drops from electric power generation. And 2030, with our bill, here's natural gas, but 40% of the natural gas has the carbon captured because our price is so high that even the lousy economics of carbon capture are defeated by the sharp steep of our price. Because in the end, they know it's going to keep on going, right? The revenue return has made it politically impossible to stop, right? So now CCS gets invested in, the technology gets developed, and we can start to look at what happens, how that technology might be able to drive innovation in CCS generally, so that we can actually go more carbon negative, right? So,
yes, does it allow you to modify the cost of the supply?
does it allow you to modify the cost of the supply?
So
I'm not sure, you know? I'll have to look at that.
whether or not
Well, you can put
the
a,
cost is going down, what is the cost
Yeah,
of supply?
yeah, you can put a cost on just coal.
yeah, you can,
Just
you can
gas.
individually price the
So
specific cost of yours.
nuclear or any of those you can.
Yeah, you can certainly do.
Obviously, it has some assumptions here.
Yeah.
Because if
Yeah.
your cost of your coal goes down, then obviously it's going to eat up all of the, what
Yeah,
the carbon fee is.
yeah. Do we want to go, do we want to get to 1.5? How are we going to get to 1.5?
Quick question.
Yeah,
The 3 degrees, that's predicated on adopting the CCL carbon price profile globally in 2021.
correct.
But it doesn't include the carbon sequestration rebate.
That's true. It does not, because we didn't program
There's a
that.
slider for that.
Sorry?
There's a slider for that.
Yeah, we can do that. So we can go to carbon removal, technological, right? And say, right now we've got none, right? View detail settings, yes. What do you want to remove? How do you want to remove? The BECCS I talked about before, let's crank that up, 2.9. Direct air capture, if we could get that going, right? 2.8. Enhanced mineralization, agricultural sequestration, 2.7. Biochar, right? So all of these things are incremental. These are all things that we need to do, right? If we also go here and look at land and industry emissions, methane and other, right? Detail settings. We start to adjust some of these things. Agricultural and waste emissions, right? Energy and industry emissions. This is methane, N2O. Look, you see this right here? The methane has gone away. We're now down to 2.1. Yes, sir.
So this is a wonderful model, and but it's a global view.
Yes.
When we're sitting around the table speaking with a number of folks, they tend to be U.S.-centric, and I'm sure you hear this all the time. Is there a way of looking at the model, or is there a way of using the model to demonstrate what the actual impact is of these policies, which we know we can institute in the U.S. on the rest of the global?
You cannot directly use this model to estimate the local impacts here. You'd have to do a lot more thinking. Yes, you could use it as a guide, and then but you'd have to drill in there and do a lot more thinking about what's actually going on in your local community. Right? I mean, the point has to be made that it's an incremental problem.
I appreciate that,
Yeah.
but I'm just wondering if there has been a way, an attempt to demonstrate this. You know what the impact, the total impact of emissions would be by this country, what our total potential is for adding.
Right.
If you make the assumption that the rest of the world does X, Y, or Z, to maybe offset stuff a little bit, you could work backwards and say, instead of cranking the slider all the way up, you just put it up this far, because this is our contribution.
Right. Yeah, you could potentially model an increment. You could use the model of incremental contribution as a way of approximating, for example, what the U.S. did. Right. I think if you tried to get finers in the U.S. into states, it would get into
I'm
noise.
strictly speaking, just looking at what the impact of the U.S. and move out the ICA through.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're going to need to wrap it up. So last question.
I'm a little bit confused. We're talking about the problem of initiating a carbon tax for the United States. We can't initiate a carbon tax for the whole world, can we?
Some people think we can, right? We initiate our carbon tax and it penalizes all the trading partners, and pretty soon they want their countries on a carbon tax too, because they're paying.
So your calculations are not for the whole world, they're just for the United States.
These calculations are for the whole world.
Oh.
But there actually is a mechanism through the Board of Carbon Adjustment that would allow.
I think that would be a wonderful, goal that.
Well, I can address that. Our bill theoretically will incent other large economies to bring their carbon taxes up to the same level. So there is some truth to the fact that if we pass something in the United States, we can influence the other countries.
Okay, last question is
Yeah,
KB's.
so what you're saying is what we just put in with our bill is not just if the U.S. did this, how it would impact the world. It's if the world.
Correct. Yes.
I'd like to support your comment there. Climate action plans were passed by Portland, Beaverton, Milwaukee, and another city.
Well, PGE looked at that and they said, oh my God, our plan is zero emissions by 2050. And you guys have just said zero emissions by 2035. We're going to have to change our plan.
Yeah, never underestimate the power of a local impact. Yeah, okay, it really is your last question.
Well, just, I actually wanted to see you model more, because we've got a lot on the emissions. What about the efficiency so that we blow our complete budget for
Yeah.
how much we need to produce?
Yeah, so energy efficiency.
So both transport and.
So now we do transport electrification.
No,
Coal is
efficiency.
zero, we get more out of it.
We
just went to, right, we just went to 1.9.
I think we get a lot out of efficiency because it lowers the total budget.
Yeah. We also do efficiency here on buildings and industry.
That's
We
not
elec-
efficiency,
we do
that's
el-
electrification.
We do end-use electrification, we do energy efficiency, right?
Suddenly the budget is smaller.
Yeah. So, look where we are here, right? But we did carbon dioxide, we did the technological removal. That's why we have the gray bars here, right? So without that, so we got almost all these emissions down, right? We didn't deal with afforestation, right? We didn't do that. Now the green here is a lot smaller. Now it goes negative, right? So we got 1.5. We win.